We don't know what we're doing. We're just having some fun. So I've been starting, I don't know if you remember, I'm doing a little project called Your Story Matters. And this is Jennifer Gray. She's one of my multifaceted friends, client, mentor, just somebody I look to all the time for greatness. And she has done something that I think is spectacular. So I thought I'd share it with everybody today. This is just one of the many things, by the way, that you have done that I think is spectacular.
Thank you.
But this is just fascinating on so many levels to me. So Jennifer has, had gone through some fertility treatments, I guess, in order to conceive a child, and then
in vitro.
In vitro, okay. Mm-hmm. And then through that process, did that not work? And so you went to, or is this part of the in vitro? What is this called? Actually?
So we did in vitro as a married couple and had, that resulted in the live birth of one child, my daughter, who is now 12 and a half. And then we, in doing that, instead of just only having one egg or one embryo, we actually had 8 total that came out of that IVF in vitro process. So 2 went in and 1 became my daughter. 1 did not stick and become a baby. And then there were 6 left. So you freeze those until you're ready to do that again. But ultimately, before we were ready to do that again, we got divorced. So they were frozen. And, I'm sorry, there were 8. 2 did not work out like they, in the growth part. There were 6 left over. 2 went in, 1 became Shelby. That leaves 4 left. Decide to get divorced. Still have 4 babies. What are you going to do with them? In our state, they're considered property. So I got them in the decree. That's right. 4 frozen embryos. They're mine. And
congratulations.
So then it's, what are you going to do with that? Single woman, small child at this point. She was, 2.5, 3 years old. What are you going to do? And all the scenarios I came up with were just really science fiction-y. It was having my ex-husband's baby. After the fact, he would not have visitation or any responsibilities to that child. The one child would go and spend weekends with dad, but the other one would be left behind. But who's my dad? Well, the guy that picks up the sister. It just didn't make sense. So ultimately, through a lot of just prayer and lots of crying, came to the conclusion that I wasn't supposed to have them, that I was going to have to give them up. So it turns out that there is a wonderful organization. Embryo Adoption is called Snowflake Adoption. They're considered snowflakes because no 2 are alike. And so found that organization and took about a year to kind of finalize all of that decision making. But basically put 4 frozen embryos up for adoption. Went through 3 different families before I found the one. And one family adopted all 4 embryos. They had 2 biological daughters of their own that were older. They're an older couple. And those 4 embryos have resulted now, fast forward, into 2 live births of 2 boys, one age 6, one age 4. And just like a live birth adoption, we have an open adoption, which means that we have communication and have met the family and met the boys, and they know who we are and as much as they can for their age. And my daughter is fully aware of the decision that was made and who these sweet little kids are.
The fascination that for me is kind of the science and the soul piece of it, and like, when does a soul animate a body? And do you have the same connection when you see them as your daughter? And I think you've talked about how do they represent, or what do they told you about? It's like a niece-nephew situation?
So early on, again, embryo adoption is kind of, the technology, or the laws haven't caught up with the technology, and so it's just all really kind of overwhelming and confusing. And when I was going through the process of coming to terms with the decision, like, I knew what I needed to do. I went to the doctor for an unrelated issue, and there was a magazine. I remember Sally Field being on the cover. I like her. Okay, I'm going to pick up this magazine and read it. And lo and behold, there's an entire article on embryo adoption.
And I have to say right here, that's how spirit works. Like right there. That is the perfect example of how like you are guided. Even when you don't know you're guided, the answer is right in front of you.
Yes, I definitely felt like that was the Holy Spirit at work for me in hindsight. So opening that up and reading it, and it was about a family who had lots of eggs and lots of embryos. So in my case, only having, 6 total, 4 to give up was really not a big number. There are families who have double-digit numbers. In this case, I want to say they had like 25, maybe 30. But it was an article that was following this one family. Again, very cutting edge because this would have been years ago before anyone was really doing this. I feel that way even today. But to imagine that they were back then making that decision. Now, difference is they're a happily married couple. They have all the kids that they want, I think 3. And their family is full. And they have all these embryos left over. What are we going to do with them? We're going to give them up for embryo adoption. Enters another family that they decide to adopt all of them to. They have as many babies as they're wanting to have, and then they're ready to adopt them out, and it goes to a third couple. So their story is actually 3 different families who vacation together and stay in communication together, and the author, the original mom in this whole scenario, the genetic mom, she described their vacations and coming together to celebrate all of the kids as that kind of like cousins for the kids. They felt like cousins, kind of connected in these families, and that as a parent they felt like an aunt and uncle to their genetic children who were born by these other people. So that was kind of interesting, and I would say now, having kind of lived it and met the boys, they're just super special, and I adore them. But I would say yes, most definitely. And I think it has something to do with responsibility. They're not my responsibility. And because of that, my feelings towards them are just a little bit different. I do have a niece and nephew in real life. So it's kind of the same feeling to me in that they're super special. I love them. I'm fascinated by what they look like and their behavior traits and how that's like me or my brother. Or now my daughter. And I know that if anything happened and they needed me, I'd be there in a heartbeat, no question asked. But it is definitely a different kind of love and affection that I have for them than for the child that I'm responsible for raising.
I feel like it's this reaping and sowing in a relationship these days, where the more time you spent, it's like this thread back and forth that builds and it creates more of a bond.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's pieces of it, right,
Mm-hmm.
too. And then the science piece of the genetic coding of a body, and that it's separate from personality, but it's also, because I think people relate your personality through your astrology a little bit. I know in the one instance that I can relate to as far as genetic coding goes, my first husband, he used to position his pants in the morning. Like when he put them on, he just would do a certain movement.
Mm-hmm.
And I see my younger daughter doing that.
Yes.
And I know she doesn't watch him get dressed in the morning. I know
Right.
he didn't teach her how to do that, but I'm like, where did that come from?
Right.
So is it a genetic behavior? Did his grandfather do that? I mean, I don't know where that comes from, but...
Well, so that to me translates to nature versus nurture. I have a biological father of my own who was married to my mom for 13 years, and then they divorced back in the day when people were just starting to get divorced, early 80s. We were estranged for many, many years, and ultimately I was adopted by my stepdad. So over time, it's been interesting because I've been able to reflect on that and revisit, like seeing my biological father and kind of the way he is. I'm going to say my mom has a type, even if she doesn't think she does. So one of the things, while they are very different in so many ways, were a lot of similarities in kind of their attention to detail, kind of that OCD tendency, they like things a certain way. They were both smokers at a time. They both drink alcohol. One's bourbon, one's whiskey. But it's interesting to kind of just see some of those similarities, quick to anger, like they have a short fuse. And so seeing it in my, I'd say, mid-20s, right? Kind of reflecting, or I guess it was late 20s, kind of reflecting on that, right? So I'm an adult. I've seen both of my dads now in their adult stage and going, oh, they're somewhat kind of similar but different. So I think with the boys, I see the same thing in that I see similarities with my daughter already. They live in a different state, so while we see them, we only typically see them once or twice a year for a vacation or a long weekend. So with that, it's kind of the same thing. They're not with her all the time, and yet one is, when they come together, it's beautiful. It's as if no time has passed. They're just so excited to come together and be siblings. But then also, I can see, at 6 years old, and even when Josh, the oldest, when he was, 4, toddling around and seeing his behavior and saying, you did this same thing, Shelby, when you were his age. It's super powerful to kind of see that. And that's deeper than just the physical, like, oh, you have the same eyes and,
Yes.
that kind of thing.
So I know that you've had your own discoveries about how you, I guess you told me the story of you had a Dr. Pepper every day,
Mm-hmm.
and these things that you did as you were pregnant, and then wondering about the result of that through Shelby having some...
Yeah, so I am the proud parent of a child with learning differences, and I think any time that you find out that your child has a challenge of some kind, you immediately go to, was there something I did? Is there something I could have done to prevent it? So in the course of kind of coming to terms with that reality, one of the thoughts I had was, I feel like I was kind of selfish when I was pregnant. I'm going to be honest. I've gotten more crunchy as I've gotten older, but I was
I think they call that crunchy
maybe
conservative.
So something like that. So I'm somewhere in between East meets West. I'm open to what makes the most sense for us. But early on, right, I was all Western medicine, and so for me, it was, I'm a Dr. Pepper fan, so for me it was drinking one a day instead of multiples, but I didn't guarantee what size that would be. So you could count on 32 ounces a day throughout my entire pregnancy. I had a caffeinated drink, right? There are a lot of people who would totally freak out about that. I had a scheduled C-section because the thought of my water breaking on my mattress or in my car really stressed me out. So I had a scheduled C-section. There are people who have strong opinions about that. I didn't breastfeed. I bottle fed. Again, that was the right choice for us. Others have different opinions. So as you think, going through that checklist, right, you're like, man, I did all the wrong things. I'm sure that if I did all those other things, that she wouldn't have these problems. So what's kind of nice about having a genetic sibling that was grown in a totally different human being's body, in a totally different environment, is that you can reflect on that. So Josh, again, he's 6 now, but he is like Shelby's twin. In the pictures of his birth, if you put their 2 hospital pictures together, it would be like in a magazine, Find What's Different. And you would struggle because they looked exactly the same. The difference is blue and pink, really. So in seeing him kind of grow and develop, he too is, it turns out, having some different different learning differences, but similar if we look at the spectrum of what those are. And he was raised by he's raised in a totally different household. His pregnancy experience was totally different. When he was in utero, his mom was not drinking soda. She's older than I am, but more athletic, so exercising every day. He was not a scheduled C-section. He was nursed as an infant. She stayed home. I went back to work. Those kinds of things. And it turns out it doesn't matter if we were on this end or this end of the spectrum. We had the outcomes that were meant for these children. I've definitely embraced that now. But I think the science and just kind of the way that you roll the dice and you can get so many different configurations, because we've got Matthew too, who's our third baby. And he's totally different than either of them. No learning differences. He's the biggest of the babies in that, he was largest at birth. He has great growth milestones. It's just fascinating to me.
Well, and you're the perfect person to be experiencing this because your awareness of everything is part of the story. And people that, aren't aware of it, can't really relate or relay the discoveries. So
Well, and I do think, and we've talked about this, how interesting it is. I mean, who has a bio dad and was adopted by their stepdad? Like who's that girl?
the
And then, you got divorced and you gave up your babies for adoption. Your embryos for adoption. I mean, it's just
perfect, right?
I mean, ultimately, and my daughter and I have had these conversations. For me, really wanting to be transparent and upfront with her. I don't feel any shame about the decisions that I have made, the choices that I've made, and I think it's important. I feel strongly that it's important that she doesn't feel that as she's growing up, and that it's our normal, and we're good with it.
Well, I just love that word transparent too. It's so important. And I think it's something, I don't know why people are afraid to be transparent, but I think bringing that one forward, so thank you for that.
I think vulnerability has a lot to do with that.
Well, yes, yes. But we carry so much guilt and shame for things sometimes too, and there's no need for that.
I just refuse to do that.
I don't think that that's anything we need to create more of here.
No.
Ever, anywhere.
I think that's part of why it has been important for me to share our story. So in our circle, everybody knows our story. Like it's our normal. So we've been pretty upfront about it from the beginning. The first time we met the boys, my daughter was in the 3rd grade, and we met them we were meeting them over the Christmas break. And I remember at my daughter's 3rd grade Christmas party, another mom's introducing herself to me. We've never met. She has twin daughters. And I'm introducing myself. She says, "Is Shelby your only one?" I, of course, say, "Yes, she is." To which my 3rd grader interjects, "Well, except for my 2 brothers that God told her to give up for adoption."
Out of the mouth.
And I say, "Hi, my name is Jennifer Gray. My daughter is an in vitro baby." And we had embryos that were given up for adoption, and that's what she means. And thank the Lord, this woman has twins from IVF. So
perfection.
It was a softer blow because she kind of understood what we were talking about.
That's fantastic.
But yeah, so we've been really upfront from the beginning and just sharing. And then even now that the kids are growing, I think it's even more on my heart because again, what I think is unique about our story, I mean, the whole thing is pretty unique. But in all the cases that I'm aware of embryo adoption, the decision is made by happily married, loving family couples who have all the kids they wanted, and they've made this decision together, as heart-wrenching and hard as it is to do. That wasn't my story. I had to do it by myself, and I didn't think my womb was closed at that point. I thought, I was 32, 33. So I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to have more kids, or I want more kids. Like, this is not what I planned.
Is it ever what we
right. So I think ultimately that is something that has become super important to me. Is just, I know there are other women out there who are coming to terms with the end of their marriage, coming to terms with having more embryos than they want to raise or are comfortable with bringing, to life. So for me, it's letting them know that they're not alone, that it can be a really scary and fearful thing at the beginning, but you can find peace with it by the end and actual joy from the decision. On the front end of that, we would have never expected that.
Well, I think anything we go through that's kind of challenging on all those things is just a huge opportunity for growth. So, and you have just leaps and bounds in this department, like just completely gracefully.
You've seen it in action.
Yes, in action.
Not always pretty.
I know.
Not always graceful.
I'm her hairdresser also, so I get all the scoop. I guess that why this fascinates me too is the element of that we are personality, that we are spirit, that we are genetic coding. That, I mean, it is like a science experiment, and we're like, take a little of this DNA and a little of that, and we shake it in a test tube, spill it out, and see what we get, and then obviously impose it in an environment. So it just creates more curiosity for me. But anyway, thank you for sharing your story. I love you. I might leave Jennifer's email address in case, or the email address of the agency, if anybody has any.
Definitely. There are like millions of embryos frozen right now, and just waiting to have a shot at
Souls
life.
that want to come in, bring
Yep.
it on. Okay.
Definitely.
All right.
So there's a real need, and there's a lot of great information and resources available if anyone's interested.
All right. Cool. So here's to another super
Yes.
beautiful, brave soul. Love you.
Thank you so
Okay.
much.